Picture this: two ancient superpowers at the absolute pinnacle of human achievement. Both commanded vast empires that stretched across continents. Both built cities so magnificent they were called wonders of the world. Both wielded military might that could crush armies and topple kingdoms in a matter of weeks. Yet one of these civilizations endured for 3,000 years, surviving every invasion, every natural disaster, every political upheaval that history could throw at it. The other, it collapsed and had to rebuild itself from scratch every few centuries, like a phoenix that kept burning out before it could truly soar. I'm talking about ancient Egypt and Babylon, two civilizations that literally defined what it meant to be a superpower in the ancient world. But here is what will absolutely blow your mind. Egypt maintained continuous civilization from 3100 BCE to 30 BCE. That's 3 millennia of unbroken cultural continuity. To put that in perspective, Egypt lasted longer than Christianity has existed, longer than the Roman Empire, the British Empire, and the United States combined. Meanwhile, Babylon, despite all its legendary wealth, military prowess, and architectural marvels like the Hanging Gardens, could never maintain power for more than a few centuries at a time. The old Babylonian Empire lasted about 300 years. The Neo-Babylonian Empire, another 300 years. Each time it rose to greatness, each time it seemed unstoppable, and each time it crumbled into dust, forcing future generations to rebuild everything from scratch. Today, we're going to decode the mystery behind this staggering difference. What made Egypt virtually indestructible while Babylon remained chronically fragile? The answer will fundamentally change how you think about power, survival, and what it really takes to build something that lasts forever. The first secret to Egypt's immortality and Babylon's fragility lies literally in the ground beneath their feet. Geography isn't just about pretty landscapes, it's about survival. And in the ancient world, geography was often the difference between thriving for millennia or collapsing within centuries. Let's start with Egypt's ultimate geographical cheat code, the Nile River. But this wasn't just any river. This was nature's most reliable gift to humanity. Every single year, with the precision of a Swiss watch, the Nile would flood its banks and deposit incredibly rich, fertile soil across the entire Egyptian delta. This annual flood, called the inundation, was so predictable that Egyptian farmers could plan their entire agricultural cycle around it. Think about what this meant in practical terms. Egypt could feed millions of people without ever worrying about unpredictable famines or crop failures. When your civilization has a guaranteed food supply that literally renews itself every year, you can focus on building pyramids, developing art, advancing medicine, and creating the stable institutions that would define Egyptian culture for 3,000 years. But the Nile's gifts went far beyond agriculture. This river also served as Egypt's primary highway, connecting the entire kingdom from north to south. Goods, people, information, and armies could move efficiently throughout the empire using the Nile's current and predictable winds. This created unprecedented unity and communication across vast distances, something that would prove crucial for Egypt's long-term stability. Now let's examine Babylon's geographical nightmare. Babylon sat between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in Mesopotamia, which sounds like it should have been just as advantageous as Egypt's Nile, right? Completely wrong. These rivers were unpredictable and often hostile to human civilization. Unlike the Nile's gentle, reliable floods, the Tigris and Euphrates could unleash devastating deluges that destroyed entire cities, followed by years of drought that turned fertile farmland into barren wasteland. Babylonian farmers never knew if next year would bring abundance or starvation. This agricultural uncertainty created constant economic instability, which led to political upheaval, which led to military weakness, which invited invasion. But geography's impact on these civilizations went far beyond rivers and farming. Egypt possessed what military strategists call natural fortress advantages. To the east and west of the Nile Valley stretched vast, unforgiving deserts that were nearly impossible for large armies to cross. The Sahara Desert alone was hundreds of miles of shifting sand, scorching heat, and deadly dehydration, a natural barrier that deterred most potential invaders for centuries. To the north, Egypt was protected by the Mediterranean Sea, which required naval technology that most ancient armies simply didn't possess. To the south, dangerous cataracts, rocky rapids, made the Nile nearly impassable for invading forces. Egypt was essentially surrounded by natural walls that were more effective than any human-built fortification. Babylon, in contrast, sat in the middle of Mesopotamia's completely flat plains. No mountains, no deserts, no seas, no natural barriers whatsoever. It was like building the world's most valuable city in the middle of a perfectly flat highway with signs pointing toward it from every direction. Every ambitious empire, Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, Romans, Arabs, could march straight to Babylon's gates without encountering a single geographical obstacle. This geographical vulnerability meant that Babylon had to spend enormous resources on military defense rather than cultural development. While Egypt could invest in art, architecture, and institutions, Babylon was constantly building walls, training armies, and preparing for the next inevitable invasion. Geography set the stage, but politics determined the outcome. And here is where we discover perhaps the most crucial difference between these two civilizations. Egypt created a political system that actually worked for 3 millennia, while Babylon suffered from chronic leadership chaos that guaranteed regular collapse. Egypt's secret weapon was divine kingship, a political innovation that was absolutely revolutionary for its time. The pharaoh wasn't just a king or military leader. He was literally considered a living god, the earthly incarnation of divine power. This wasn't just religious symbolism. It was a brilliant political strategy that created unprecedented stability. When your ruler is believed to be a god, several things happen that strengthen the entire political system. First, succession becomes sacred rather than competitive. When a pharaoh died, the divine power simply transferred to the next pharaoh, usually his son, through religious ceremony rather than military conquest. This meant that Egypt could transition between rulers without the devastating civil wars that plagued other civilizations. Second, divine kingship created institutional continuity that transcended individual rulers. Even when dynasties changed, and Egypt saw 30 different dynasties over 3 millennia, the system itself remained intact because the institution of divine pharaoh was considered eternal. Bad pharaohs could be replaced, but the system that made Egypt continued unchanged. Third, this divine authority allowed pharaohs to mobilize massive resources for long-term projects. When a god-king orders the construction of a pyramid that will take decades to complete, nobody questions the allocation of resources or wonders if the next ruler will continue the project. Divine authority meant that Egypt could think and plan in terms of centuries, rather than the typical ancient timeline of a single ruler's lifetime. But perhaps most importantly, divine kingship created what political scientists call legitimacy without force. Egyptian pharaohs rarely had to maintain power through constant military campaigns or brutal suppression of rivals. Their authority was accepted as natural and inevitable, which freed up enormous resources that other civilizations had to spend on internal security. Now, contrast this with Babylon's political nightmare. Babylonian kings ruled through military strength and personal charisma alone. They had no divine mandate, no sacred succession system, no institutional continuity that outlasted individual rulers. When a Babylonian king died, the throne went to whoever could seize it by force, usually through civil war that devastated the kingdom as resources and infrastructure. This created what historians call the strongman cycle that plagued Mesopotamian civilizations for centuries. A powerful military leader would conquer Babylon, and establish a dynasty. For a generation or two, his descendants might maintain control through inherited wealth and established power structures. But inevitably, some combination of weak leadership, economic crisis, or external pressure would create an opportunity for the next strongman to seize power through violence. Each transition and years of civil war, destruction of infrastructure, massacre of educated elites, and collapse of trade networks. Even when new rulers successfully took control, they had to spend years rebuilding what had been destroyed during the conquest. This constant cycle of destruction and reconstruction meant that Babylon could never accumulate the institutional knowledge, cultural continuity, and economic stability that characterized Egyptian civilization. The political differences created cascading effects throughout both societies, shaping everything from art and religion to trade and technology. Egypt's stability allowed for the development of a remarkably unified culture, while Babylon's instability created a society in constant flux. Egyptian society was unified by the Nile in ways that went far beyond geography. From the Delta to the Cataracts, Egyptians worshipped the same gods, spoke the same language, and followed the same customs. Art, architecture, and writing were standardized across the land. Hieroglyphs told stories in temples from one end of Egypt to the other. The same style of monumental building, pyramids, obelisks, temples, dominated for thousands of years. This cultural unity created a strong sense of identity that survived even when foreign rulers took over. Egyptians saw themselves as a chosen people, living in the only truly ordered land in the world. Religious festivals, agricultural cycles, and royal rituals were celebrated by everyone, creating social cohesion that lasted millennia. Babylonian society, by contrast, was a melting pot. The city itself was a crossroads, attracting traders, conquerors, refugees, and migrants from across the ancient Near East. Its population was diverse, its languages and customs many. While this diversity brought wealth and innovation, it also brought division. Clashes between different groups were common, and religious, linguistic, and ethnic tensions could easily flare up during times of crisis. Economically, Egypt's advantages were overwhelming. Thanks to the Nile's regular floods, Egypt's economy was the most reliable in the ancient world. Each year, the river brought new life to the fields, guaranteeing food for the people and taxes for the state. This allowed for long-term planning and massive state projects that lasted centuries. Trade flourished along the Nile and with neighboring lands. Surpluses could be stored against bad years, and the central government could redistribute resources as needed. A strong bureaucracy kept everything running smoothly. Economic stability meant that Egypt could weather droughts, invasions, or internal strife. The system bent, but rarely broke. Babylon's economy was a roller coaster. The city's location at the crossroads of trade made it fabulously wealthy when things were good. But the unpredictable rivers and frequent wars meant that famine and disaster were always just around the corner. Trade routes could shift, crops could fail, and the city's riches could attract dangerous neighbors. When times were good, Babylon was the richest city in the world. When times were bad, it could be sacked, burned, and left in ruins. Here is where we discover perhaps the most crucial difference between these civilizations. Egypt mastered the art of survival through strategic adaptation, while Babylon repeatedly destroyed itself through rigid resistance to change. This difference in survival philosophy would ultimately determine which civilization achieved immortality and which remained trapped in cycles of self-destruction. Egypt's approach to foreign conquest was absolutely revolutionary for the ancient world. When faced with superior military force, most ancient civilizations had two options: fight to the death or surrender completely. Egypt pioneered a third strategy that was pure genius. They absorbed their conquerors while maintaining their core identity. Consider what happened when Alexander the Great swept through the Persian Empire in 332 BCE. Most conquered peoples either resisted desperately or completely abandoned their cultural identity. Egypt chose neither path. Instead, they welcomed Alexander as a liberator from Persian rule and immediately declared him pharaoh. Think about the brilliance of this strategy. By making Alexander a pharaoh, they forced him to operate within Egyptian political and religious systems. The result was extraordinary. Alexander's conquest actually strengthened Egyptian civilization rather than destroying it. He had to respect Egyptian customs, maintain Egyptian institutions, and rule according to Egyptian traditions. Alexandria became one of the greatest cities in the ancient world, but it was built using Egyptian labor, Egyptian resources, and Egyptian architectural principles. The famous Library of Alexandria preserved and expanded Egyptian knowledge rather than replacing it with foreign ideas. This pattern repeated throughout Egyptian history. When the Romans conquered Egypt, they found a civilization so well established and culturally confident that it was easier to work within Egyptian systems than to impose Roman ones. Roman emperors became pharaohs, adopted Egyptian religious titles, and even built temples in traditional Egyptian styles. Egypt survived by being like water, flowing around obstacles, adapting to new containers, but never losing its essential nature. This flexibility allowed Egyptian civilization to absorb the best elements from every conqueror, while maintaining the core identity that had sustained it for millennia. Babylon's approach was exactly the opposite, and it proved catastrophically self-destructive. Every time foreign armies approached, Babylon chose military resistance over diplomatic adaptation. This wasn't cowardice. Babylonian armies were often formidable, and the city's walls were legendary. But this rigid approach meant that each conquest became a total catastrophe rather than an opportunity for renewal. When the Assyrians conquered Babylon, they didn't just change the government. They systematically destroyed Babylonian institutions, deported skilled craftsmen and scholars, and attempted to erase Babylonian culture entirely. When the Persians later rebuilt Babylon, they had to start almost from scratch because so much institutional knowledge had been lost during the previous destruction. This pattern of total destruction, followed by complete reconstruction, meant that Babylon could never accumulate the deep institutional wisdom that characterized Egyptian civilization. Each new Babylonian empire had to rediscover basic principles of government, rebuild trade networks, and reestablish cultural traditions that had been wiped out during previous conquests. Let's examine specific historical examples that perfectly illustrate this crucial difference in survival strategies. The Hyksos period in Egypt. This represents one of Egypt's greatest tests of resilience. The Hyksos, a Semitic people from Western Asia, invaded and established control over much of Lower Egypt for about a century. This was traumatic for Egyptians, who viewed these foreigners as illegitimate oppressors disrupting the cosmic order. Yet even under foreign rule, Egyptian civilization continued to thrive. Egyptian scribes kept writing, artists kept creating, and religious practices largely endured. Most remarkably, the Hyksos themselves began adopting Egyptian customs, presenting themselves with pharaonic titles and even writing in hieroglyphs. Rather than imposing their culture entirely, they found themselves absorbed by Egyptian civilization. After a century, the Egyptians successfully expelled the Hyksos, ushering in the glorious New Kingdom period of unprecedented power and prosperity. The Hyksos invasion became a source of strength rather than permanent damage. Egypt had proven its ability to absorb foreign influence, learn from it, and emerge stronger. Babylon's repeated catastrophes. Compare this to Babylon's cycle of destruction. The old Babylonian Empire, famous for Hammurabi's legal innovations, was suddenly sacked by the Hittites around 1595 BCE. The Hittites didn't even stay to rule. They simply plundered the city and left it in chaos. This created centuries of political fragmentation and foreign domination by peoples like the Kassites. The Neo-Babylonian Empire, under Nebuchadnezzar II, represented Babylon's most magnificent incarnation. The city became the largest and most splendid in the ancient world, with its legendary hanging gardens and massive fortifications. Yet in 539 BCE, it fell to Cyrus, the Great of Persia, with surprising swiftness. While Cyrus was relatively merciful, Babylon lost its independence forever, becoming just another province in the vast Persian Empire. Each time Babylon fell, its ruling class was replaced, its institutions were dismantled, and its cultural continuity was shattered. Unlike Egypt's ability to maintain its essential character under foreign rule, Babylon's identity was fundamentally altered with each successive conquest. The deepest reason for this disparity lies in the fundamental philosophical core of each civilization. Egypt built for eternity. Babylon built for immediate glory. Egyptian worldview was profoundly shaped by the concept of Ma'at, a cosmic principle of truth, justice, balance, and eternal order. The pharaoh's primary duty was to maintain Ma'at, ensuring the stability of the universe and the prosperity of Egypt. This led to a culture obsessed with permanence and continuity. Everything in Egyptian society was designed with eternity in mind. The pyramids weren't just tombs. They were statements of enduring existence, built to last forever. Egyptian laws, customs, and institutions were crafted to function the same way for centuries, creating predictability that allowed for long-term planning and investment. When Egyptians built something, they built it for 1,000,000 years. This eternity mindset meant that short-term gains, temporary victories, or individual glory were always secondary to maintaining cosmic order and institutional stability. Innovation was valued, but only when it strengthened existing systems rather than replacing them. This created a civilization that could adapt to new circumstances while maintaining its essential character. Babylonian philosophy, while equally sophisticated, emphasized immediate power and human ambition. Living in a geographically unpredictable region prone to floods and invasions, Mesopotamian cultures often had a more fatalistic view of existence. Their gods were powerful but capricious, and human life was seen as fleeting and uncertain. Babylonian kings built magnificent ziggurats and elaborate palaces, but these were monuments to current glory and power, designed to impress and intimidate during their lifetime. They chased spectacular achievements that would demonstrate their dominance to contemporaries, but often lacked the underlying philosophical framework to translate this glory into lasting institutional stability. The tragic irony is that Babylon's focus on immediate glory often undermined its long-term survival. Resources that could have been invested in stable institutions, defensive infrastructure, or economic development were instead spent on spectacular but temporary displays of wealth and power. What can modern nations, organizations, and individuals learn from this 3,000-year experiment in survival? The Egypt-Babylon comparison offers profound insights that remain startlingly relevant today. Let me know in the comments, and subscribe to Dynasty Decoded for more secrets of civilizational survival that still matter today.